Did we get energy wrong? Despite incredible medical innovations in recent decades, some health concerns continue to rise. We want to take some time to talk about health and healthy habits, and to do that, we look at a recent publication on the topic, Good Energy by Casey Means.
Welcome back to AtoZrunning, where we help runners thrive. I'm Andy.
And I'm Zach. And just a reminder, you can learn everything about what we do and our services at AtoZrunning.com. And we're posting content on Instagram, YouTube, and Spotify, among others. And don't miss our recent episode of the World of Running News, which we are now publishing separately from our topics. I don't know exactly how best to say that. Topics, like the content of what we're talking about with runners and running stuff. And so we're separating them as two different episodes so that you can listen to one, the other, both, and do whatever you want to do. We think that will be helpful.
Let us know if you like the new format, because we're just starting and we want to do what's best for you. That's really why we're changing things up, because we think it might be.
We do indeed think so. So what you're going to get today now is a focused episode on the topic as promised in the introduction, and a chance to chew on some of these ideas and break them down together, as well as be able to then, I think it makes it easier to find and return to previous topics, especially because we do a lot of these in series. And so you can now jump one to the other a little bit more easily as you're trying to get a sense for what are Andy and Zach talking about. Like our topic today, which is health and healthiness and healthy things and all things health. Is that a fair summary of
Yeah, I do think it's a fair summary of the topic. If you've been questioning, am I eating things that are good for me? Am I missing some information on how to live life healthily? This is the episode you want. And you might want to consider some takeaways on how to improve health based on some of the research presented here today.
Indeed. And you know that we love research and studies. We'll try not to spend too much time in the weeds and the numbers at times when Zach gets carried away with these things. But
I'll nudge him.
Andy will keep me on track. And yet, it is information that's helpful, because one of the things we found the most before we kind of get into it is that people tend to think we know more than we do about something, and we tend to think we're doing more than we are when in terms of like positive things.
What are you talking about?
Just
Are you talking about this topic?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Like people in general. Okay.
Yeah, people in general. That's
all
right.
right.
Oh, you mean you thought I was talking about me?
Yeah.
Or you? Okay, well, as it were, it's a great topic. We're going to spend a couple of weeks on it, and so a couple of different episodes on it. So we're going to give you the first chunk now, and you'll find that it is a big enough and broad enough topic to spend just about as much time as you want. And so we think we'll be able to do so efficiently here. That's our goal.
Let's get to it.
So thinking about good health and healthy habits, the first comment that I want to make is that there is an infinite amount of content out there today on this topic. And much like it's always been, as a colleague of mine often has said that if you want to find research that proves something about food, you'll be able to find it. Like over the years, you've found that cholesterol is good for you, and you found that cholesterol is going to kill you. And then you found that it's good for you again.
Because there's different kinds of cholesterol.
And then it turns out there's different kinds of cholesterol. And then it's like, well, this source is okay, but this one's not. And then those flipped 10 years later. So the point is not to be cynical here. The point is to be critical and understand that whenever we take the information available to us right now, it is only what we can know at this moment based on what people have evaluated. And I think that that's relevant in part to something we were sharing in our recent running news episode when we were talking about the carbohydrates studies around how many carbohydrates do you need while you're running. and how much can your body process and such. And then one researcher's like, but that's not even the point. It's this other thing. And it's like, okay, well, so maybe other people haven't studied that. So we probably should spend a little more time with it now and, things like that, right?
Because it's helpful for me and healthful for me to frame things in a way that doesn't make me feel overwhelmed and doesn't make me feel frazzled, because sometimes getting a lot of information makes me feel frazzled. There might be others like me out there. So let me be helpful and hopefully healthful in the framework of this. And that is not to start scribbling down a list of a million changes that you want to make based on the latest, greatest research and information and the digestion of that information. I want you to come to this with maybe thinking, okay, what are just maybe a couple things that I can implement that could help me be more healthful? And also moderation, moderation in life. So that was helpful for me when talking about this topic with Zach, and I think it will be helpful for some of you.
It's an interesting reflection. We should stay on the reflection just a little bit longer, because I was noticing this interview. I didn't actually watch the interview. It just popped up in my field of vision with some people they call biohackers. That's like the term they give to people who essentially have found like ways to live many, many years longer than normal. And they're usually related to health-based types of things. And it struck me as I was thinking about it that there's a kind of critical line between optimizing everything to obsession and perfection and just being willing to make some choices that I know aren't necessarily the greatest, best, healthiest choice I could make right now, but there's a kind of compromise that we all are making. Fundamentally, we're all making it all the time. And I think that is an important thing to remember. As we start talking about this topic, we're going to draw some conclusions in the end that are going to circle right back to that point. But where is the compromise that I am making here? Because it's happening somewhere. And most importantly, in my mind, am I aware of enough of the relevant information to be making that choice deliberately? Like, I am willing to eat that donut today. Not because I eat donuts 5 times a day, every day, for the rest of my life, because I won't do that. It's not great for me. But I'm willing to eat that donut today, though I know it's not the healthiest thing I could eat. And that's part of that compromise. And so getting a sense for those types of things, I think it's going to be important to keep that filter on mind as we do this. And then the last thing I wanted to say is we're sharing, in particular, we're going to use one person's work and ideas to create a baseline for our reflections here. But as I mentioned before, this seems to be an industry right now where if you want to make money, just publish an opinion about health and wellness and food in particular, and make it something that's a little bit controversial and something other people aren't saying as much, and you're going to make money. Like that's just the rule of the thing right now. And so we have to take that into account and be, as I said, critical, not cynical, but critical of the information coming our way, which is also what I told my students when I was teaching high school English and U.S. history. So here we go. Let's talk about Good Energy by Casey Means. First, quick background on the author. Means is she has an MD degree, but she never finished her surgical training as a doctor. She was in her final year or two of, is it fellowship, residency, whatever that is. She was on her way to become an ear, nose, and throat doctor and was trying to decide if she wanted to particularly specialize in one of those three and a very particular specialty within that. And that was when some of these ideas began for her. And you can read the book to get her full background. But she'll talk about the medical industry in this book. And she clearly has some pretty strong opinions about it. And yet, understanding that she's not someone who's like, she was inside the medical industry, which is where those opinions came from. I think that's valuable. It's important to establish context here. So aside from that, most of her work, and really what we're going to focus on, is the premise of there's a general lack of good health. In America in particular, she focuses on America because that's where her information is going to come from. And it's because of poor energy habits. the way she's going to frame this, which I think is a really interesting approach. So what areas does she address within that? I mentioned she talks about how the medical industry operates a little bit. She talks about the idea of just reacting to a problem as opposed to trying to seek good health. Those are two separate things. And so when we're making decisions, are we making them because I feel badly right now and I want to fix that? Or are we making them because these are the good things that are going to keep me healthy? We talk all the time in running about proactive versus reactive. We don't want to be just reactive. Like when you get injured, now you make a change. There are certain things we can do to better prevent injury. Similarly, in general health and wellness. So that's going to be an important part. Also, and I think this is always something worth reflecting on, where are the incentives and the incentive structures? There's a study, or rather a survey of 1,000 plus random people from all over the place on food and health. And one of the points in the survey was asking people what motivates them to make decisions around purchasing their food. And the top two reasons that people said were taste and price. And fundamentally, taste and price have nothing to do with good health. And so that we don't make decisions based on the right incentives is kind of the point. And then when you start to look at the industries involved and the incentive structure for the food industry is all upside down. It's all backwards. The biggest recipient of government subsidies in agriculture and food are the companies that make things like hydrogenated oils and highly processed corn syrup and that type of stuff. But that's not surprising because they also make good products. However, the part that was really surprising there was the tobacco industry receives multiple times more subsidies than all fruits and veggies combined.
That's really hard to believe.
But it isn't, because the tobacco industry is so big. And so you think about just scale. And so, yes, there are other things the tobacco industry does than just make cigarettes, as it were, but really not much. And so you just get senses of the incentive structures in societies in general are always going to be suspect, because who has the biggest pockets, the deepest pockets, and can push the hardest for the things they want. That's always a question. And it's generally not it's generally self-motivated to make money in some sense. But then also in our own incentives. And I think that's the part that we always want to be reflecting on. Why am I making the choices I'm making? Is it convenience, which is another one of those big motivators on that survey for food choices? Is it convenience? Is it because it's what I like, whether or not it's good for me? Those types of things. We want to have a critical eye to our incentives. And then lastly, one of Mean's points in this work is it is often the case that significant health issues that arise, especially later in life, were predictable based on less significant things and patterns that were happening earlier in life. And so one of her comments in the work is they have found consistently that even when someone is in very poor health, that changing some of these habits can have pretty quick and immediate reversal effects on their poor health, to the point where she'll say things at times like someone comes in with significant biomarkers of bad health, like high cholesterol or poor blood sugar insulin levels. And then 6 months later, they're in a very healthy state because they've made some changes to their day-to-day life. It's pretty cool. Okay. What are the big areas around energy? That's the next question.
First one is sleep. As you might guess, that is directly related to our energy. At least I know that I feel it when I wake up without enough sleep.
And what happens internally when you get enough sleep or when you don't get enough sleep, and the ramifications, certainly. Food, obviously, which is going to make a big difference in the conversation around internal biology and some things we'll talk about.
Movement, exercise, daily functional movement habits.
Right on. Stress, which can be all forms of stress. We start to talk about a lot on this podcast the difference between cognitive or psychological stress and physical stress. And yet, while those things are different, they have a very similar and in some cases identical physiological consequence, what happens inside our body, which is kind of crazy.
Then exposure to toxins, either ingested or outside of us.
Yep, certainly. And then the last one that Means notes in her work is she talks about light, in particular sunlight. And so why is it good for us, which there's plenty to be said about that, but also what actually we're doing and what's happening day to day. Most of us live our entire lives indoors, save for a few rare exceptions, as we do things. So anyway, those are the main topics. What we're going to do here is we're just going to talk about a couple of them in particular to give a sense of the scope of and type of concerns being raised, and then start to talk about what our perspective is going to be trying to form good and healthy habits. And then next time we're here, we'll talk about what those specific healthy habits are too. All right, so a few of those considerations. The thing that Means writes about that I found the most fascinating, because I haven't encountered this as much other places, is her focal point is on cellular and metabolic dysfunction. And her basic claim is that cellular dysfunction is the root cause or core root of all of our general health problems, disease and energy levels and certain other kinds of things like it's not just physical disease, it's cognitive disease, it's neurological things. And so this is an unprovable claim currently. So we have to always remember, if someone's going to make a statement like that, it's very difficult for someone to prove or disprove that. But she's going to point to enough clear research that there are connections. And so this isn't a baseless claim. But it is interesting. So then what we get from this is when I'm doing something, whether I'm eating something, sleeping, doing physical activity, whether I'm psychologically stressed, any of those things, that there are cellular level consequences for those things, good and bad. And when our cells are receiving unhealthy stimuli, any type and form, that they are going to adapt to that and become dysfunctional in some sense, whether that's just lesser function or they're literally going to be doing things that they shouldn't do healthy-wise. A good example of that is something like inflammation. Inflammation is a good example. For some reason, certain neurological biomarkers induce the need at a cellular level to create inflammation. And so when you're stressed, your cells see that as like we have to do something to help with this problem. And so then you produce inflammation internally. And so then you get a physiological effect from something as simple as psychological stress. And so that's an example, because that helps us understand that the connection isn't always obvious or explicit. It's not because you ate something that your cell absorbed and that was toxic to it, but it's like behavioral things and how our cells respond to that. It's the lack of certain things, like sunlight, for instance, and what happens to our cells when they are receiving enough sunlight in some regular basis. It's good for them, things like that. Okay, so that's the question. How do these pathologies result from cellular dysfunction? And then what are the kinds of healthy habits that consistently support positive cellular function? Those are the big questions. So, that being said, one of the major concerns, both that the author raises and that we were encountering when we were just starting to do other studies, is that there's a major disconnect between what we know to be best individually and as a society and what we do and what we prioritize. They're often opposite.
Yeah.
Which I can personally attest to the truth of that in so many ways.
I think we all can.
Didn't the Apostle Paul say,
the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out?
What I do not want to do, and what I want to do, I do not do. So thank you for those wise words, Paul, and he's not the only one who has written them. But can we do better is a big question here. So I wanted to talk through a couple of the different areas here and Andy in particular, I'm interested in some of your reactions to these because they're kind of fascinating. But where areas that we know this is happening, and it's just kind of like, why? So school start times. This is fun. Teenagers need more sleep than adolescents and adults. It is just true. We know that to be true. It's not necessarily a lot more, by the way.
Isn't
but
an adolescent a teenager? You mean child?
I'm saying sub-teenager when I say adolescent.
Okay.
But you could say preteens are probably in this ballpark too. So
I think so.
Yeah, children and adults, and then there's the teen years, whatever they are. So they need more sleep. But in particular, what's interesting is that studies show not just necessarily that they need more sleep, but that it is better for them not to wake up quite so early. Like there's a consistent undertone where, yes, if you go to bed earlier and wake up earlier, that's better than little sleep. But if you just don't wake up quite so early, it seems to be helpful too. And yet, what schools have the earliest start times across the country? High schools. And that's where our teenagers are.
And high achiever 0 hours.
And then even more. So I didn't even know about this until I met Andy and the Rockford folks, that because my school didn't have this, and I've never attended a school that had the option of attending an earlier hour in the day. And yet, that high achievers, what was the structure of that? I actually don't know.
Well, there's a 0 hour. In my world, it was musical, though.
Okay, so if you wanted to participate in other things.
As if you want to go above and beyond and do something extra. But I think there are also 0 hours that have like advanced maths and things. Mathematics, I should say. Yeah.
That's cool. But not really, though. It's cool, but maybe not.
But they're like, where is the time? Like,
right.
I think that it's more like we want kids to do so much. I think that's maybe more of the societal, cultural peg in this wheel than it is like, oh, we want the kids to get up early. It's not nefarious necessarily. It's just like what they're trying to fit it in a day that only has a certain amount of hours.
Yeah. Well, as it were, you just touched on it. Why do high schools start earlier than every other school?
Because there's more to do in sports. Yeah.
It is literally the reason. And so I can't say, I have not polled and surveyed every single school and decision maker everywhere, but I have worked in education long enough now, and I've talked with many administrators about this. The school that I first taught at, the first year I was teaching there, had no sports and started an hour later than other high schools. I taught high school. Started an hour on purpose. They were like, hey, all the research says you should start later. Let's do it. But they also had no sports. What happened when they decided to add sports? They bumped the school start time an hour up because you couldn't participate in athletics without missing the school day because every other school was doing sports earlier, and so we had to make that choice. Remember the compromise we talked about earlier? That's one of them. But if all the research says you should start school later as a high schooler, why can't we just find a way? Why cannot we find a way? I don't know. So that's one. And while we're on the topic, because it was recent, daylight savings time and time changes, right? We've known for years.
It's rough.
Yeah, we've known for years that the time change creates, things like the rate of accidents, like road accidents with automobile accidents, increases dramatically in the short term after the daylight savings time change happens. That overall self-reported feelings of cognitive disorders and some of those kinds of things increase for a short period of time after time changes. So why are we still doing it? I know why we originally were doing it. I understand the argument, but I don't think that's relevant anymore. And many other those types of examples. So how about things like funding? We know that there are constant conflicts of interest, that food companies fund the majority of the FDA. I think it's 40%, in particular, 40% of the FDA's funding comes from food companies.
And there's lobbyists.
And things, right?
Yeah.
And so, and that's tolerable.
It's tough.
It's tolerated. As a society, we have said it's okay for private industries to give lots and lots of money to political people who are then making decisions about rules and regulations that affect those private industries. I don't know that there's a good solution to that, but that's the compromise we've agreed to as a society so far. I challenge you to try to change it and see what happens. But it gets worse because then you have things like the American Academy of Pediatrics receives substantial donations from Abbott, who makes baby formula. And so what do you think Abbott is encouraging the American Academy of Pediatrics to promote? The virtues of baby formula, which, again, studies show it can be okay. Baby formula, when it's necessary, is an amazing thing. but a mother's breast milk is better when possible. And so why aren't we attending to that? And then even worse, the American Diabetes Association receives a significant amount of funding from Coca-Cola, who is one of the greatest sources of bad health around sugar and many others. So again, I'm not trying to be cynical. We're trying to be critical, but not cynical. And so these things are important to carry our perspectives, as it were. And you have other types of things. Food assistance, like government funding, food assistance, 10% of the SNAP funding is used for sugary beverages, which
people are choosing
merit.
Themselves.
Right. So. Yeah, well, that's the point. SNAP funding, you get to buy what you want with your funding. Out of, it's not an unlimited number of categories, but is it okay that you can buy regular Coke with food assistance? Because you're getting food assistance because you need assistance to afford good food.
Yeah.
Yes. So why are you buying things that's not good food? That's a question.
So maybe it's more of an educational thing. Maybe people don't know that these things are not good for you.
That's what your sister. Let's talk about your sister for a moment.
You probably should ask her if you can talk about
No, this is public.
Okay.
Her dissertation.
Okay.
And so Andy's sister did a project on diabetes and what benefits simply raising awareness, education has on people making good choices that will help prevent diabetes. And the answer is a lot. It's really good. We got to go to her defense, right?
Yeah.
If I'm recalling. And that was really cool to hear.
Well, I went to one of her educational classes because she
You did that, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and her dissertation.
Yep. And so to answer Andy's point, education does make a difference. And so that's always going to be a way to say we can positively influence this without making any changes to the system. We can still at least help as a society. How can we go about that? Food quality, of course, is just one that you hear people talking about this all the time. Like, why does the United States have so many things that other countries are banning? And it's, and it's okay. Well, there's lots of reasons for that. But at a minimum, the idea that there's over 80,000 synthetic chemicals approved in food today, despite a lot of it being known to cause great harm. That's not okay. So you get the point. And there's others. We could talk more about these kinds of things. But what it comes down to is we know there are things that are bad, and we accept that. And then we know there are things that are good, and we don't do that. And we want to try to improve upon that. That's one of our goals with this topic right now, is to build some clear sense of where am I possibly going awry myself personally in some of those areas, knowing that a lot of these are systemic or institutional, and I'm not probably going to make those things change as of right now. I did want to share one more while we're on that line of thought, because this was kind of crazy. The 2018 NIH review of overweight and obese numbers in the United States. They do this every several years. The 2018 review showed 72% of adults in the United States classified as overweight or obese, 42% in fact as obese, which is up from 15% in 1976. So 3 times higher in not so many years, and continues to rise today. But we know the majority of things that you can do to prevent overweight or obese progression are known things. We know what habits, and yet those numbers are still going up. That's an example that I think just demonstrates, I make a lot of choices in the things that I eat personally. I'm talking personally right now, that I know, that is only going to be negative for me. And if I do that in some small amount occasionally, that's probably not a concern. But I probably do it a lot more than that. And that goes back to I don't necessarily know. I'm not self-evaluating very accurately. All right. One quick caveat. I do want to say this because the author does, and I think it's important. We were talking about the medical industry earlier, and the author is very clear when she says, I do not want to make the medical industry or big food like the enemy here, and in particular medicine, because it has been very effective at doing the thing it's supposed to be trying to do, which is there's this problem happening right now. What can we do to fix it? And the medical industry has found incredible ways to address those types of things over the years. You talk about life expectancy and the improvement in life expectancy in the last 150 years. It is true. The medical industry, medicine at large, has increased life expectancy significantly. However, the important thing to remember with that is the majority of that benefit has come not from overall positive health increases, but from finding ways to solve certain precise major problems: infectious diseases, general sanitation, germ theory, broadly, all of those things. So many good things, but those many good things don't necessarily mean that we are all much healthier now than we were, say, 50 years ago. So let's talk about 2 examples. We wanted to get into some studies. We said that we would. Let's talk about sleep for a second. Sleep is one that this is where Zach's conviction falls. What do you have to say about it, Andy, about my sleep?
I think you should. It's your place to talk about your own sleep.
Oh.
I could talk about things that I'm doing, and you can talk about things that you're doing.
You don't want to.
Or not doing.
You don't want to say how bad my sleep is?
I don't.
Well, not to our audience, at least. Because it's bad. The point is, it's bad. And I fall under some of the categories that these studies demonstrate here pretty clearly. One here, published in 2022, this study from Frontiers in Public Health specifically was looking at the effects of getting more or less sleep than optimal. And optimal is kind of a range. It's not the same for every person. But the point is, even 1 hour of sleep less than what you should be getting can increase, actually specifically they said, associated with significant elevated risks of all-cause mortality. So we're talking about potential life-threatening things. The increase in risk factor goes up by 25%. Now, we're not talking about 1 night of sleep. This instance was over about a 10-year period. And so 25% increase in mortality risk factors by getting 1 hour of sleep less than you should. And the weird part is the same thing is true by getting too much sleep, more than you should. So there's an optimal range, and once you're outside of that, it's not good for you. That's the point.
It does make you pause, though, and consider, in a study like this, there are bound to be reasons that someone perhaps isn't sleeping very well, like underlying condition, or on the flip side, they're sleeping too much because they have an underlying condition, and those things then turn to some of these negative indicators that we're seeing.
Yes, and that's so this study made an effort to try to control for pre-existing things, but a lot of things that are pre-existing are not known in general with people. And also, you never can study something like this in isolation. It's not possible to know that sleep was the causal factor for some of those things. You can know that it's associated, though, and that's what the claim that they make. They do not try to say that anything here is causing anything else, which is a part of the problem with food studies in general, too. We'll talk about that more another time. A different sleep study said that people regularly overestimate the amount of sleep they get.
I'm not surprised about that.
Yeah, not at all.
Tossing and turning.
Yes. So if you plug yourself up to, put your watch on that has the heart rate monitor, and they have a sleep monitor built into those, most of them, and try this for like a week. And don't look at it first and say to yourself, here's about how much sleep I think I got last night. And then after a week, then look at the data and see how close you were. They say you're probably going to miss it by about an hour, which is quite a bit.
But we're not saying to go hook yourself up unless you do believe that you might have a condition or some issues with this, because I do think that the mismatch theory can apply in this arena too. And if you think like, oh my goodness, if I have one of those, either your heart rate or you have one of the rings, the Oura rings or something that tell you how poorly you're sleeping, I think it could make you feel worse the next day because you didn't get good sleep. So
yeah, that's true. That's possible.
Yeah.
So another study here, the last one we'll share about sleep, showed what actually happens when we are sleep deprived in our physiology. And the part that they identified, and then I was cross-referencing it with a different study to see if it was the same thing, which it was, is sleep deprivation, even one night of sleep deprivation, produces a measurable increase in a certain, I don't know exactly what type of enzyme it is, but a certain type of enzyme that, one, causes inflammation, and two, inhibits the things that help your body reduce inflammation. That's probably why it causes inflammation. And so that thing that's being produced is the same exact thing that happens when a person is experiencing significant psychological stress or significant physical stress without enough rest in between. And so, wow, we find out that your sleep deprivation and your stress are making the same thing happen to you. And that thing that they're making happen is an increase in inflammation.
So it's really challenging as I reflect on like my personal experience. So I had injuries that caused inflammation, but I've been in like a chronic state of inflammation while sleeping, especially because inflammation does increase at night as your body tries to repair. So many people experience inflammation. But if that inflammation keeps you up at night, it is a cycle, a bad cycle.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Because bad sleep creates more inflammation. Inflammation creates bad sleep. And this speaks to what what Casey Means says in her book in particular, that things like that generally you can follow them back to cellular dysfunction. And the question then is simply, why am I experiencing cellular dysfunction? And so the cause part is always the hardest part with these things. And the problem is that we're inclined to want to say it's because of this thing over here, whatever this thing is. And her argument is it's not because of that thing, it's because of all of this. Like it's a body of things that all influences in small ways, and cellular dysfunction does not manifest in the same way for the same person at the same time. And so you have to try to read your body, know based on how I'm feeling and what's happening with my body that something is not quite right, and how can I do things to make it better, which we'll get to that shortly. One last topic before we wrap it up here, in particular, that Means spends quite a bit of time on, is food. And naturally, because food being the thing you're putting in your body to try to give yourself energy, I wanted to share about that 2018 health survey, the food and health survey conducted by the International Food Information Council, who conducts surveys somewhat regularly. Found some really incredible things that are just really strange stuff. First of all, you get something like 70% of people want food with no artificial ingredients. And yet, when asked what are your top reasons for buying the food you buy, taste is number one, price is number two, and familiarity is number three. Number four is healthfulness or healthiness. Number five is convenience. And so, health-related things is only one of the top 5 reasons and not in the top few. And so that is a disconnect, right? Like, I want what is good, but I'm not actually going to do the things that help me get what is good.
I have another thing to add in there.
Please do.
That is likely the case for other people like me. And that is, I'm shopping fast. I've got kids with me, or I need to get back so I can actually get my run in, have some time to exercise, and it takes forever at the store. It takes way longer than we ever anticipate it will. It seems like every time. It's a surprise. And so we're not looking at all the ingredients listed. We just think that's healthy, and it's the familiarity thing. It's like, I think that's healthy, but I haven't actually taken the time, because I'm already here longer than I want to be, to look at it. Yeah. So I do think part of it is that, and also, like we mentioned earlier, a lack of knowledge of some of the things that are artificial or not good, or things that are additives that are not causing us to be more healthy, but actually deteriorating our health and well-being. So I did want to add that in there because it's personal. And
Right. Well, that's exactly right. That's the question of convenience too, where convenience, and for a number of different reasons, but if I'm looking at a shelf of food, do I even know how to know if the thing is better than the other thing? And for most of us, the answer is, well, does it say it on the can? It's like organic, then that's got to be healthier, right? But not necessarily.
It's not, and that's the crazy thing. I actually have a story. So I went to the store, and there was 2 different cottage cheese, and they both said that they were natural, and that they were they both looked like they were good. The packaging, the one I was actually more drawn to, Then I looked on the back, and one of them had like tons of ingredients, and the other one was like just straight up cheese, milk, whatever.
All it is.
And I was like, wow, these are like the same thing, and they even advertise with the same exact wording, but one has a bunch of additives.
Yeah, they have long written about and criticized how food labeling, like the design of the food label, is a significant influence on our decision making.
Yeah, some stuff looks so healthy and it's not.
I know. Isn't that crazy? But the food companies are just like, if we
Smart,
make this
they're
look
smart.
the way you want it, then you'll buy it. And the question I always go back to with that kind of thing is, so you know your food is not the best thing for us. You don't care that it's not. You just want us to buy it, and you're going to find ways to trick us into buying it. That's not okay. That is not okay, food industry people. Okay.
Can I say something in defense of the food industry? Okay, so I'm going to say something in defense of the food industry, and that is that shelf life significantly decreases without some of those chemicals and preservatives. So what happens is they end up having to throw away a lot of their inventory. And so it is totally an economical decision that they're making. And even though it seems nefarious, it's because we're not buying their product necessarily, and then it's getting put to waste if it's more natural.
Well, sure, that's definitely part of it. That's always going to be, the economies of thing. There's a lot that goes into it. How about how many people think we have good health? I did want to say only 60% of respondents on the survey. This is a big survey. Only 60% of respondents said they'd be willing to pay more for better food. So
because it's already so expensive.
Because it's expensive, right?
It's already so expensive,
right? Which goes back to the point of the least healthy food is the best tasting and the cheapest, and the top two motivating factors for why people buy things is taste and price. So you have the whole thing.
I'm gonna live forever.
What
mentality?
You just wanted to break out in song.
No,
I think that's what that was.
Because we think, okay, it's fine. Like our body can process anything. Especially runners, like if the engine is hot enough, it will burn anything because we're working out so much or whatever. And so we have this like, I'm gonna live forever kind of mentality, and it's like, that's fine, like, and then it becomes habitual rather than occasional.
The invincibility complex, yeah, that is. So how about this? 56% of people surveyed view themselves as having good health, but 60% were overweight or obese, and yet only 8% reported themselves as overweight or obese. So remember that disconnect. How can that be true that 8% self-reported what 60% actually had or were? Some of that is knowledge, right? Like I don't actually think of myself as categorically whatever the thing is you're asking, because I don't actually know what it means to be categorically whatever you're asking. That's the idea of like self-reporting having good health. So if 56% said they had good health, how many of those surveyed do you think had a significant health issue? And the answer was a lot. I guess I didn't write that statistic down. Oh, there it is. Nope, that's a different one. Okay, so significant amount of people had a significant health issue, like 51% or so, and yet 56% say they have good health. Well, what does good health mean? And do I know whether or not my health is good? According to the author, most of us don't know whether or not our health is good because the things that can show us our healthiness are not obvious. It's not just how I feel. It's not just whether or not I'm overweight. She says that that's only one small factor in the question of healthiness. And yet we're just like fixated on it as a society, for better and worse. And so how do I even know? Actually, that's something we're going to talk about next week.
A piece of that is that for many runners in particular, and if you're listening to this, it's very likely that you like to run. Or I'm not really sure why else you listen to this podcast. But if you like to run or you're thinking about running, it's very possible that when you go to the doctor for your checkup, everything is fine. And so you are given the feedback because you in general report fairly healthily. Yeah. You're not paying as close of attention to some things that could be causing distress. And I do want to mention that there is cyclical stress that happens where runners in particular are over expending energy, even though most reports say that people don't report, like they think that they're exercising more than they are. I would argue that there are many of you listening that are like me who don't realize how much stress they have going on in their day-to-day when they're training for a marathon. So for instance, when I was working my auto show job, I was on my feet for 10 hours a day performing, which is an additional level of adrenaline and stress, heightened level. And
psychological stress.
Then I was also training for a marathon. So the amount that I was putting my body through exceeded a healthful amount. It did. It exceeded a healthful amount. So there's both ends of this spectrum that I do think that we need to address and think about as humans.
Truly that. Yeah, so what it comes down to, well, I guess the one last comment to that extent is Means writes about a few, and we're going to share them next week, a few things that can help us just know, am I in a healthy state? Not that these are comprehensive and cover every single thing that can be going on inside our bodies, but they are the most accessible because they're easy to measure and pretty predictive of just about all the major health things that are going on. And so her point is you have basically two criteria. You have the level that if you go to the doctor and they, do a blood sample or something, they're going to say, oh, you're healthy, you're good. Because the doctor's looking for red flags. Are you in the danger zone? And if you're not, then they're not concerned about it. Unless you're getting close to it. Of course, the doctor's going to see, oh, the last time you were this and this time you're this. Well, that's not going in the right direction. Things like that, certainly. But her comment is, but that is not the same as optimal health. So danger zone is quite a bit beyond green zone. And her point is, do we know what the green zone is? And are we paying attention to a few? There's only a handful of things that let us know whether or not we're in the green zone. And that's going to be helpful for sure. And we'll talk about it next time around. So our closing remarks here, what should we do? What should we not do? And our point is always with these kinds of things, it is really easy to become obsessed or all consumed with this type of stuff. And everything I'm thinking about, everything I'm doing is trying to optimize all things.
So you might be that, right? You might be like Zach. Or you could go to my tendency where it's like, I just feel like it's kind of hopeless, so I'm just going to ignore it.
Yeah, the opposite of obsession is overwhelm and
failure to move,
just
analysis paralysis.
Yeah, and neither of those are good things. And so our point here is in all these types of things, we're always trying to be aware of what we are doing, the decisions we're making. And when we talk about training, we talk about intuition. And do I know what I'm doing, and do I know what I need to be doing? The same thing applies here. Grow your intuition, understand what's going on with your body and how you're doing things that are influencing it, and then try to make better choices. And as mentioned at the outset, there's always going to be a kind of compromise. Try to minimize the amount of compromising you're doing with these kinds of things, and I think you'll be in a better place. That's about it until we get to some more specific recommendations next week. So, don't miss the rest of our regular content, like our weekly running news. We share strength and mobility recommendations and resources. We share a lot of stuff, and you're going to find all that stuff on Instagram, Spotify, and YouTube.
You won't find it all on Instagram.
No.
You want to go predominantly to your favorite podcast platform, and YouTube now actually holds the most amount of our content.
You will find the most things that we're trying to do to share with people on YouTube. That is true.
Yeah.
And so head there to look for more from A to Z Running. And if you find yourself looking to make a change in your own training and running efforts, check out our coaching services at AtoZrunning.com.
Thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you next week.